Welcome to another episode of Unaffordable Wars, yet every country is intensely preparing for it. On Life Facts Daily, we'll be having insight on America's endless wars without declaration, Europe's return to the battlefield, and the price of power. It is the most expensive arms race in human history, and unlike previous ones, this one comes with an even higher risk. The world isn't just building weapons. It is mortgaging its very future to pay for them. In 2024 alone, nations poured a staggering $2.7 trillion into their militaries. To put that into perspective, that is more than the combined GDP of entire continents. What makes this figure even more shocking is the timing. Governments are drowning in post-pandemic debt, struggling with runaway inflation, and trying to rebuild infrastructure that is literally crumbling beneath their citizens' feet. And yet, despite all these challenges, global leaders have decided that the priority must be rearmament. Why? Because almost every country fears the same thing, that the next war might not be just a regional conflict, but a world-shaking confrontation that no one can afford to lose. Take Scranton, Pennsylvania, once just another industrial city, now the beating heart of America's rearmament machine. For decades, the General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems factory ran on 1 or 2 shifts, producing enough shells to fill U.S. stockpiles and keep allies comfortable. Back then, 10 to 14,000 artillery rounds per month was more than enough. Today, that world is gone. The factory floor now burns with constant activity. Sparks shower from welders' torches. Massive hydraulic presses stamp artillery shells out of 1,000-pound bars of steel. Every 4 minutes, another deadly round rolls off the line. The sound is relentless, like the pulse of a war that hasn't officially started yet. The factory has shifted to a wartime pace. 3 shifts, 7 days a week, nearly 40,000 shells per month. And yet, it still isn't enough. Ukraine consumes more 155 millimeters ammunition in 2 weeks than America produced in an entire year before 2022. Each shell that rolls off the assembly line is already spoken for, either to replenish U.S. reserves or to replace the weapons drained by endless shipments to Kyiv. But here's the brutal truth. Every one of those shells represents a small fortune for the average American family. It's not just steel and explosives. It's money that could have gone to schools, hospitals, or rebuilding roads. Instead, it vanishes into the desperate arithmetic of modern war. This is the hidden cost that rarely makes headlines. Politicians talk about security and defense, but for ordinary citizens, the numbers are terrifying. A country that cannot fix its own bridges is spending billions on weapons it hopes never to use. And yet, the logic feels unbreakable. If America slows down, if Europe hesitates, if Asia holds back, someone else will surge ahead. The result? A self-perpetuating cycle of fear, where preparation becomes indistinguishable from provocation. This is not just a story of weapons. It is a story of economies, of societies, and of ordinary people whose futures are being quietly mortgaged in the name of deterrence. And while the world builds, history whispers warnings. The Soviet Union collapsed under the weight of military spending. Britain won World War II, but emerged bankrupt, its empire crumbling. Even the United States, during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, was burning through $12 billion a month, with long-term costs that will haunt its budget for decades. Yet here we are again, marching down the same path, only this time the stakes are higher. Technology is faster. Weapons are deadlier. Economies are more interconnected. A single miscalculation could bring not just armies, but entire global markets crashing down. This is the world we now live in, where the race to prepare for war threatens to bankrupt nations long before the first shots are even fired. And this is only the beginning. In the next part, we'll peel back the layers of America's defense budget, a sum so massive it outpaces the economies of most nations on Earth, and reveal how the U.S. is fighting not one, but 3 wars simultaneously without ever declaring them. America's endless wars without declaration. The United States is not at war, at least not officially, but its budget tells a very different story. In 2024, America spent $886 billion on defense. To grasp just how enormous that number is, imagine this. The U.S. military budget is larger than the next 9 nations combined. It is greater than the GDP of countries like Switzerland, Belgium, or Sweden. And if the Pentagon were its own economy, it would rank among the top 20 nations in the world. But what hides beneath this astronomical figure is even more revealing. The Pentagon's base budget covers personnel, salaries, maintenance, and everyday operations. Yet what really drives the machine forward are the emergency supplementals, last-minute cash injections that often escape deep scrutiny. For example, in 2024, Congress approved an additional $30.6 billion just to refill ammunition stockpiles. That single line item cost more than the entire annual military budget of countries like Spain or Brazil. On top of that, another $113 billion was sent abroad in the form of military aid, much of it to replace weapons America had already shipped overseas. What does this mean in practical terms? America is paying not just for its own defense, but also for the wars of others. Ukraine's fight against Russia, Israel's struggle in the Middle East, and the looming technology race with China are all draining U.S. coffers at once. It is as if the country is simultaneously waging 3 separate wars, all without ever formally declaring any of them. And the costs don't stop with the Pentagon. For the first time in American history, interest payments on the national debt, about $640 billion per year, nearly equal what is spent on defense. That means that every dollar borrowed to buy weapons has to be repaid, often with more money than the weapon cost in the first place. Analysts in the Treasury Department have described this situation as uncharted fiscal territory. In simple terms, America is borrowing money to fund wars, and the cost of that borrowing is now competing directly with the money needed to maintain its military readiness. This raises a disturbing question. What happens when the debt becomes so heavy that it begins to erode the very security it was meant to protect? While the United States struggles with this paradox, China is quietly accelerating its own buildup. Officially, Beijing reported a $296 billion defense budget for 2025, a 7.2% increase that continues a decade-long pattern. But Western intelligence estimates the real number is closer to $450 billion. Once hidden programs, dual-use technologies, and nuclear modernization are accounted for. This figure is not just about quantity, it's about strategy. China has built the largest navy in the world by hull count, rapidly expanded its nuclear arsenal, and deployed hypersonic missiles that the U.S. admits it cannot currently defend against. Each time Beijing unveils a new capability, Washington scrambles to respond with $1 billion countermeasure. The cycle is endless, a high-stakes chess match where each move costs entire national budgets. For ordinary Americans, these numbers are almost incomprehensible. Every shell, every missile, every drone represents tax dollars, borrowed money, or cuts to other programs. Schools close, healthcare remains underfunded, and infrastructure decays while the defense budget grows larger than life. But this is not just America's dilemma. Across the Atlantic, Europe is entering its own era of rearmament, breaking decades of political tradition in the process. Nations that once treated military spending as optional are now pouring unprecedented resources into their armed forces. Germany, long hesitant to rearm, has pledged to double its defense spending within 5 years, aiming to surpass NATO's 2% GDP target and eventually hit 3.5%. This transformation began in 2022, when then Chancellor Olaf Scholz declared a turning point in history after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. To prove his point, he announced a €100 billion special fund for defense, the single largest military investment in German history. The consequences of this decision are staggering. Germany, once seen as Europe's reluctant military power, has now surged into the ranks of the top global spenders, reshaping the balance of power in the region. And Germany is not alone. Poland has gone even further, raising defense spending to 4% of GDP and buying thousands of tanks and armored vehicles from South Korea, and the United States. Even neutral countries like Sweden and Finland have abandoned decades of careful restraint, joining NATO and ramping up military budgets with unprecedented urgency. The European continent, which once celebrated the end of the Cold War as the dawn of lasting peace, is now preparing for battles that may never come, but spending as if they were inevitable. In the next part, we'll explore how this transformation is playing out across Europe and why neutrality, once seen as a safe bet, is quickly disappearing in the face of global uncertainty. Europe's return to the battlefield. For decades, Europe lived under the illusion that war was a relic of the past. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the continent declared the end of history and cashed in the so-called peace dividend. Defense budgets shrank, armies were downsized, and NATO became less a shield than a political club. But in 2022, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, that illusion shattered overnight. Today, Europe is once again preparing for war. Not necessarily because it wants to, but because it feels it must. Consider Germany. For much of the post-war era, it was content to rely on American protection, keeping its armed forces small and its defense spending low. But when Chancellor Olaf Scholz declared a Zeitenwende, a turning point in history, he meant it. Germany pledged 100 billion euros in immediate defense investments and committed to raising annual defense spending beyond NATO's 2% GDP threshold, aiming for as high as 3.5%. This isn't just a budgetary shift, it's a cultural one. Germany, once deeply cautious about military power, is now buying F-35 stealth fighters, modern tanks, and building out one of the most advanced missile defense systems in Europe. For many Germans, it feels like history is repeating itself, but with new, modern stakes. Then there's Poland, which has emerged as NATO's forward bulwark. In 2023, Warsaw stunned its allies by announcing it would spend 4% of GDP on defense, double the NATO requirement. Poland has ordered over 1,000 tanks, hundreds of howitzers, and advanced fighter jets. Some analysts now call Poland the new military heart of Europe, a role once reserved for Germany and France. The Nordic states have also abandoned neutrality. For decades, Sweden prided itself on its independence, refusing to align with military blocs. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, Stockholm realized neutrality could no longer guarantee security. Sweden has since joined NATO and rapidly boosted defense budgets, investing heavily in air power and naval strength to defend the Baltic Sea. Finland, once balancing carefully on the edge of Russian influence, also joined NATO in record time. Its conscription-based, military, and vast artillery stockpiles suddenly became a cornerstone of NATO's northern flank. In fact, Finland fields more artillery pieces per capita than any other European nation, a chilling statistic that reveals just how seriously it takes the Russian threat. Even Switzerland, the world's most famous neutral state, has been shaken. While it has not abandoned neutrality outright, the Swiss parliament has been debating reforms to increase defense spending and modernize its small military. For a country that last mobilized in World War II, this represents a seismic cultural shift. Across the continent, military budgets are swelling at rates unseen since the Cold War. France has announced plans to expand its nuclear deterrent. The United Kingdom, already Europe's second-largest spender, has pledged to push beyond 2.5% of GDP. Italy, Spain, and even smaller nations like the Czech Republic and Romania are racing to modernize their forces. But all this comes at a cost. Europe is struggling with energy shortages, high inflation, and a demographic crisis as aging populations strain welfare systems. Every euro poured into tanks and missiles is one less euro for pensions, healthcare, or green energy. Yet governments argue they have no choice. The memory of Russia's war in Ukraine hangs over the continent like a dark cloud. Images of destroyed cities, fleeing refugees, and artillery duels have shaken Europeans out of their post-Cold War complacency. The message is clear. Peace can no longer be assumed. It must be defended, and defended at enormous expense. Still, This rapid militarization raises questions. Is Europe truly preparing for defense? Or is it stumbling back into the same trap that ensnared it in 1914 and 1939, a spiral of military buildup that makes conflict more likely rather than less? History offers no comfort here. In the early 20th century, Europe's great powers armed themselves to the teeth under the banner of deterrence. But deterrence became provocation. Alliances hardened into obligations, and a single gunshot in Sarajevo set the world ablaze. Could today's massive rearmament lead to a similar miscalculation? If there is one difference, it is this: Europe no longer acts alone. Its security is deeply tied to NATO and, above all, to the United States. And while Europe builds its armies, the real arms race is happening across the globe. In the Pacific, where China is challenging not just America's power, but the very balance of the international system. In the next part, we'll travel east to explore how Asia is being reshaped by military competition, why the Pacific could become the world's most dangerous flashpoint, and how nations from Japan to Australia are preparing for a conflict they pray will never come. P. The Pacific powder keg. If Europe is rearming out of fear of Russia, Asia is doing so out of fear of China. The Pacific has become the most volatile region on Earth, a place where rival superpowers, rising economies, and old historical wounds collide. And the arms race here is not just about numbers. It is about survival. At the center of it all is China. Over the last 2 decades, Beijing has transformed its military from a bloated Cold War relic into a modern, high-tech fighting force. Its navy is now the largest in the world by hull count. Its missile arsenal includes hypersonic weapons that travel so fast they can evade U.S. defenses. Its nuclear stockpile has doubled since 2020, with projections suggesting it could quadruple by 2035. China's goal is clear: to dominate the Western Pacific and, most crucially, to bring Taiwan under its control. For Beijing, Taiwan is not just a rebellious island. It is a symbol of unfinished business from the Chinese Civil War. But for the United States and its allies, Taiwan is a front line of democracy, as well as the heart of the global semiconductor industry. A conflict over Taiwan would not only risk regional war, it could collapse the global economy overnight. That is why Japan has launched its most dramatic military buildup since World War II. For decades, Tokyo maintained a self-defense force limited by its pacifist constitution. But now, alarmed by China's aggression and North Korea's missile tests, Japan has pledged to double its defense budget to 2% of GDP by 2027. It is buying Tomahawk cruise missiles from the US, developing its own next-generation fighter jets with the UK and Italy, and deploying advanced missile defenses across its islands. This is not just about numbers. It is about psychology. For a country that once renounced war entirely, Japan's new doctrine, allowing preemptive strikes on enemy bases, represents a seismic shift in national identity. The sleeping giant of Asia is stirring once again. Further south, Australia is also reshaping its role in the Pacific. Through the AUKUS Pact with the United States and the United Kingdom, Australia will acquire nuclear-powered submarines, capable of patrolling vast ocean distances and countering Chinese naval expansion. At the same time, Canberra is investing in cyber warfare, drones, and long-range missiles. Australia, once comfortable as a middle power, now sees itself on the front line of a struggle for regional dominance. Its leaders openly admit that the peaceful Pacific of the past is gone, and that the future will be far more dangerous. Meanwhile, South Korea remains trapped between 2 unpredictable neighbors, North Korea and China. Pyongyang continues to test nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, while Beijing steadily expands its influence. In response, South Korea has invested heavily in missile defense, next-generation fighter jets, and even hinted at the possibility of developing its own nuclear weapons if the U.S. nuclear umbrella ever fails. Then there is India, the sleeping giant of South Asia. Locked in a bitter border dispute with China, New Delhi has accelerated its military modernization. It is buying French Rafale fighters, expanding its navy, and testing hypersonic missiles of its own. India's partnership with the United States through the Quad, alongside Japan and Australia, is designed to counterbalance Beijing's growing influence across the Indo-Pacific. What makes the Pacific so dangerous is not just the scale of rearmament, but the geography of flashpoints. Taiwan is the most obvious, but not the only one. The South China Sea, crisscrossed with disputed islands, has become a militarized zone bristling with bases and missile batteries. The East China Sea simmers with tensions between China and Japan over the Senkaku/Diaoyu Islands. Even the Korean Peninsula remains technically at war, with tens of thousands of U.S. troops stationed just miles from the world's most militarized border. Each of these flashpoints could ignite a larger conflict, not because anyone wants it, but because the military balance is so fragile. A single miscalculation, a jet collision, a naval skirmish, a missile test gone wrong, could spiral out of control before diplomacy has a chance to intervene. And unlike the wars of the past, a Pacific war would be fought with weapons the world has never truly seen in action. Hypersonic missiles that strike without warning, AI-driven drones that swarm targets, and cyber attacks capable of shutting down entire power grids. The scale of destruction could be immediate and catastrophic, but the greatest cost might not be measured in bombs or bullets. It would be measured in economic collapse. The Pacific is the beating heart of global trade. A war here would halt shipping through the South China Sea, cutting off the flow of oil, food, and raw materials. Factories from Seoul to San Francisco would grind to a halt without semiconductors from Taiwan. Stock markets would crash, and ordinary people across the globe would feel the consequences within days. This is why the Pacific arms race matters to everyone, not just those who live there. It is not just about power, but about the stability of the entire global system. And yet, despite these risks, nations continue to arm themselves at record pace, believing that the best way to prevent war is to prepare for it. But as history has shown, preparation can sometimes make conflict more likely, not less. In the final part, we'll explore the broader consequences of this global rearmament, how ordinary people are paying the price, how debt and fear are reshaping entire societies, and why this may be the most dangerous gamble humanity has ever taken. The hidden cost of war without war. The world is not officially at war. No nuclear missiles have been launched. No great powers have yet clashed head-on. And yet, the cost of this new arms race is already staggering. Not just in dollars, but in what societies are forced to sacrifice in the name of security. Let's start with the debt trap. Governments everywhere are borrowing at record levels to fund their military expansions. The United States now spends nearly as much servicing its debt as it does on defense itself. Europe, already weighed down by aging populations and pension systems, is piling billions onto its balance sheets to pay for tanks, planes, and missiles. Developing nations, from Africa to Latin America, are caught in the middle, pressured to pick sides, tempted by weapons deals, but unable to afford the price of entry into the global arms race. The danger is not just financial, it is also social. Every dollar poured into weapons is a dollar not spent on schools, hospitals, or infrastructure. In America, veterans already outnumber teachers in many states, and yet funding for education continues to lag while defense budgets soar. In Europe, healthcare systems groan under the weight of demand, even as governments boast about new fighter jets. In Asia, millions still live in poverty, while their nations invest in hypersonic weapons. This is the silent trade-off. Citizens are told that sacrifice is necessary for safety. But the true danger is that the pursuit of safety itself becomes the greatest threat. And then there is the psychological cost. For an entire generation that grew up believing the Cold War was history, the return of the arms race has brought back an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Children practice cyber attack drills in classrooms. Families wonder if their savings will evaporate in the next economic collapse. Young adults, already disillusioned by climate change and inequality, now face the possibility of being drafted into wars their parents thought would never come again. Technology adds another chilling layer. Artificial intelligence is being built into drones and missile systems, raising the question, who decides life and death when machines are in control? Cyber warfare threatens to blur the line between war and peace, with hackers able to plunge cities into darkness without firing a shot. And space, once the domain of exploration, is fast becoming the next battlefield, with satellites targeted as legitimate military objectives. What makes this all the more tragic is the illusion of deterrence. Leaders insist that massive stockpiles of weapons will prevent war, that by preparing for the worst, they will ensure peace. But history offers a darker lesson. In 1914, Europe believed its alliances and armies would keep the peace. Instead, a single assassination plunged the world into chaos. In 1939, the same continent believed appeasement would buy time. It did not. Even the Cold War, which avoided direct superpower conflict, brought the world to the brink of annihilation more than once. Today's arms race is no different. Each nation believes it is preparing for defense. Each nation believes it cannot afford to fall behind. But together, they create a system so unstable that even a minor spark, a misfired missile, a misread radar, a miscalculated order, could ignite a chain reaction no one can control. And yet, despite the warnings, the spending continues. The Scranton factory keeps rolling out shells. German lawmakers keep approving new defense budgets. Chinese shipyards keep launching warships. Japanese leaders keep rewriting pacifist policies. Each country, convinced it is buying security, may in fact be buying only time. The most haunting question of all is this: what if the world can no longer afford peace? Because peace, too, has a cost. It requires trust between nations. It requires investment in diplomacy, in cooperation, in addressing the root causes of conflict like poverty and inequality. But those investments are being neglected, starved of funding, drowned out by the noise of military buildup. If this continues, the world may face a paradox more dangerous than war itself. A future where we are not destroyed by missiles or bombs, but by the sheer weight of trying to prevent them. A future where nations bankrupt themselves, chasing security, only to collapse from within. This is the true danger of the modern arms race. It is not just about who has the most ships, the fastest missiles, or the largest stockpiles. It is about whether humanity can learn from history, or whether we're doomed to repeat it, only this time with weapons so powerful they could end civilization in a single day. The story is not over. In fact, it may only be beginning. The arms race of the 21st century is still accelerating, its costs rising by the hour. Whether it ends in peace, in collapse, or in catastrophe will depend on choices made not by generals or factories, but by the societies willing or unwilling to pay the price. And as history has shown again and again, that price is always higher than we imagine. For more chilling, informative stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, share, and like our channel. Life Facts Daily.